This week on Overtime, we take a look at what it means to go. Stories of God's faithfulness and showing up. Make sure you like, subscribe. Let's get it.
Welcome to Overtime, a weekly podcast where we take a little more time to dive into Sunday's message. And here on the couch today, we've got Pastor David back from vacation. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And Jess is back with us, which it's been a little while since you've been on the podcast, but I'm really excited in particular to have you here with John because we had a guest pastor preach on Sunday, Pastor Kevin Hockenberry, and you guys go way back.
We do.
With Kevin and Stacy. So the first thing I want to ask is who has a story they'd like to share about Pastor Kevin or Pastor Stacy from back in the day?
Oh, man.
There are so many stories. It's hard to choose.
We need at least one.
And they're not all from back in the day. There are some recent stories.
You can choose whatever you'd like.
I don't know. Do you have a story?
I have so many. My brain is like, I'm trying to figure out who I want to embarrass, Kevin or Stacy, or me. Like, I can embarrass myself. Like,
There's one that Stacy still gets mad about.
You don't have to share that on the internet.
It's
unless
hilarious,
you want to.
though.
Okay.
It
Up to
involves
you.
a movie theater.
Yeah, so we went to watch Star Wars.
One of the new releases.
when they first came out. And they were doing this contest at the movie theater. I guess it's a good story because actually Kevin talked about going to the movies, but so we used to go almost every Friday night. Like that was just our thing.
I mean, we were young. We were married.
Yeah.
We didn't have a lot of money. We also didn't have kids.
And
so
it's
it was
also
like,
what people did back in the day.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially not having kids.
So they were doing this big like competition night where everybody dressed up. We didn't dress up, but everybody was like dressed up.
I mean, people who are into Star Wars,
Yeah.
like into Marvel, they dress up for like the premiere night. So.
And we love those people. We love you. We love you.
No, it was great. It
Please,
was a lot
no
of fun.
hate
We
on
did
this
not dress up.
podcast because they're vicious too. Anyway,
Comic-Con don't play.
that's right. Comic-Con. Anyway, this lady walks in with her Princess Leia honey bun hair, and she was working for the movie theater, and she said, "Whoever has a gray phone that can come to me, the first person to give me a gray phone, I have tickets for every opening night for all of the rest." Because back then we knew they were going to release 3 of them. So I got
And that
excited.
dates us. The gray phone
Yeah, it's the
dates
sli- oh,
us.
yeah.
Yeah, it
Like
was a gray flip phone.
Oh, flip phone. Well,
Yeah, it
okay,
was
you didn't
my,
say flip phone.
My gray Sprint flip phone. So reached in my pocket, realized that I had my gray phone with me. And instead of just kind of moving out of the aisles like a normal human being, I started hopping over rows like bang, bang, Olympic style, right? In honor of the Olympics, just Olympic style. And we were like 6 rows back, dead center. So I'm just like, excuse me, tossing people aside. And at the same time, Stacy had left to go or get a refill on the popcorn. And as she's turning the corner, we met. And I basically open field tackled her in front of the whole auditorium of people.
Is it better or worse that you already knew her?
I know. That's what I was just wondering.
Well, what happened was at that point, everybody started erupting in laughter. Like it was...
She was like stuck between 2 seats. Like John pushed her between 2 of the movie theater seats.
Yeah.
And it was a hilarious moment, but embarrassing.
Yeah.
And
fair.
everybody, like the entire theater was full and laughing.
Did you at least win the tickets?
No.
No.
But the-
Oh
That
my
makes it
gosh,
worse.
it was
He's,
even
he
worse.
stopped to
Part
help
that was,
her.
well, I mean, it gets funnier because Kevin, at this point, they're married, I believe.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
married.
they're married at this point. So Kevin, trying to defend the honor of his wife, gets up and says, "All right, guys, that's enough. It's funny, we get it." He starts kind of lecturing the auditorium as we're trying to pick his wife up. And
Oh, man.
I'm like just sliding into the shadows because I felt like such a jerk. That was one of the many stories.
And
One
you're
of the
still
many.
friends.
We're still friends. Our friendship has survived.
Yeah. That's actually one of the things before we get into the details of what Kevin preached that I just think having known you guys for 5 years now and seen this friendship that you have with Kevin and Stacy from afar, that's something that a lot of people want, but not a lot of people can say they necessarily have these friends that they've known since high school. And so I just kind of wondered what you would say is helpful for maintaining these friendships, particularly when you don't live in the same place, that can be lifelong, encouraging, supportive. Like even to know when Kevin was talking the time that they were planting the church, in my head, I was like, oh, that's around the time that John was taking Center City, and like to walk through transitions at the same time. Just all of that seems really neat. And I thought I would ask on behalf of the rest of us, how do you nurture friendships like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think there are definitely relationships that God puts very purposefully together. And honestly, Kevin and Stacy are one of those sets of relationships for us. There are a lot of parallels in our life that I don't believe are coincidental. We have walked through many similar circumstances in life. They're not exactly the same, but that have mirrored each other. And we have used that in times of being discouraged, trying to encourage one another, championing each other. So, I mean, honestly, it's about realizing that the Lord has placed these people in your life, and making time for them, but also understanding like everybody's busy. Everybody has things going on. So, honestly, I can tell you, Stacy and I do not talk every week. I'd love to be able to give her a call. She's running a ministry. I'm involved in ministry. We have kids. We have spouses. So it's being realistic with expectations and understanding like it's okay to pick up the phone maybe once a month and be like, "Are you okay?" or be like, "You would not believe what my kid said to me today," and like being totally okay with that level of friendship and not making demands of the other person.
Yeah, that's really good.
It's that having grace for each other, right? In different
Absolutely.
seasons, and recognizing, like you said, how different seasons operate.
Absolutely. And that to be very good friends, you don't have to chat on the phone for
Right.
20, 30 minutes every day. You can have a very strong relationship that you nurture very purposefully
Yeah.
without having to demand somebody's time all of the time.
Yeah. I wish someone had told me that in middle school when I was tying up the phone line, which is also dating me. Like we had one house, one phone line. And if someone needed to get through, like to repair the refrigerator, it would just be a busy signal because I was on the phone with my friends all
And
the
again,
time.
there are seasons to that, right? Like when each one of us has walked through something where we needed more support, we have tapped into the other person for that support.
Yeah.
But then there's moments where just like we're both, Kevin's sermon, go. We're both on
Yeah.
go. So it's just like, all right, cool. You run that way. I'm running this way. I'll catch up with you at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am a firm believer in a mile deep, not a mile wide. So I'm quick to remind people this isn't 45 people in my life that are there. This is a handful, 2 to 3, maybe 4 people that I'm this deep with. And then there's placement. Like Kevin and I, because we've navigated like his salvation journey, my discipleship journey, our calls to ministry together, that's different than the relationship that I have with Wesley Shell or Michael Wallace or even some of our team here. Like, but even then, I'm not a good networker. That's just the truth of it. John Hernandez doesn't walk into a room and start networking and knowing everybody's name. But the people who are my people know they're my people. And we have a couple things that we do. Like the expectation from me is when I call, you answer. And when you call me, I answer. There may be times we're in the middle of a meeting or he's in the middle of the meeting and he won't answer immediately. But we don't go on red for months. Like that's not a thing. But to Jess's point, there are weeks and months where we're not connecting, but it is also different because I'm wired a little different than Jess. So me and Kevin probably talk once every 2 weeks, if not every week, at bare minimum 5 minutes. Hey, how's everything going? Conversation. But that's just because I know my wiring. And there's been seasons where I've had friends flat out. They're like, that's, I need more than that. And I'm like, I can't give you more than that. And then I have friends that are like, that's too much. Okay, I can't. Then, and you just got to know that and be okay with it. Expectations that's a big phrase of mine. Like expectations being clear are huge.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I know. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say something that I was talking to actually one of my boys about yesterday was the fact that I think one of the unique things about our relationship is that we were all in the same youth group.
Yeah.
And it's rare to have friends from middle school or high school. We've all known each other since high school. But I wanted to point that out to him because he has some friends transitioning out of the school, some friends that he considers very good friends. And I said, buddy, none of us went to the same school. None of us went to the same high school. And we were growing up in South Florida. Our schools were huge. So we were one of thousands of students in our high schools. And that we found each other at youth group and formed that relationship, I think is super unique and super cool. And so you might have friends that you went to church with long ago that you have been through life experiences together as dumb teenagers and, fumbling young adults and parents who don't know what they're doing. So I wanted to point that out to him. Like, you can have these relationships. You don't have to be best friends with the person sitting next to you in English class, So,
But also, like, how crazy to think that the boys are almost the age that you were when you were meeting each other and meeting
Super
Kevin and
crazy.
Stacey, and like you could be building friendships that are going to last a lifetime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think they saw that last night. We were actually going through some videos, and we found a video of a little family vacation that we had taken together. The kids were 2, 3, and 4 years old.
Wow.
And they were sitting around on the beach, like eating goldfish and singing a little song. And then we sat on the couch and watched that. And I was like, how crazy is it? You guys have known each other literally since you were born.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
That is super
Wow.
cool. Well, I know that's not what he talked about, but I felt like it was a good opportunity to just ask questions while I've got you on the couch with a camera. But I did love Pastor Kevin preached about the story of Abraham, and he kind of interwove his own story. But this idea that a lot of people, when we look back at Abraham's life, we can see the whole picture. So it's like God told him to go and he went to the land of Canaan, but Kevin really slowed down and said, no, when God called Abraham, he said, go to the land I will show you. He didn't give Abraham the whole map of here's where you're going to go and here's what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
And his point was that often we get similar instructions. God will give us enough. He'll say, go, but we don't necessarily know the whole picture of what that means. So I wondered if you have times in your life that you can think of on the spot, since Kevin shared one of his own with this journey in church planting, when you have felt God asking you to be obedient, to go. And for the record, go doesn't necessarily mean like moving. Go can mean engaging in a relationship with a coworker. Like there are a lot of things that can be go that aren't necessarily pack up your family and move. It could be pack up your family and move. But when you've heard him say that and not known how that was going to work out.
I mean, for me, the obvious one is I often think of the season where we were in the process of adopting our boys. That was a lot of faith moments. We had we had always talked about adoption, but at that point we were at the end of 2 cycles of in vitro, and for the most part, struggling to figure out why that prayer wasn't answered the way that we thought it might be. So when the phone call came about the possibility of the boys, we weren't even in a financial place to say yes. And I think I know God knew that. So it's just not kind of obvious the way that what it became is these bite-sized questions. Like, will you take a phone call? Will you present this conversation to your family?
Mm-hmm.
Will you talk to your lead pastor about this? At the time, Dr. Rick Ross, shout out, Rick Rose. But those steps that was a lot of go. I feel like that was a go season for us. And to Kevin's point, God's provision was there almost, in every step. It was like, which allowed me to say yes to the next step, for lack of a better term. But that was a big go season for me.
Yeah, that's a good example. How did you, in that season, we hear about Abraham and it can be so clear that God's directing this, but sometimes in my life, I think that God has said something, but I'm not as positive as like Abraham being told go. There have been a couple times where it's like, absolutely. So when you don't get the whole picture and you're just taking step by step, how do you carry that? Or were you 100% sure in this situation that this is where God was leading?
I don't know if I was ever 100% sure until the boys were in my hand. And they were small enough that they could literally fit in my hand.
Crazy.
I think sometimes we tend to make the faith journey a movie. Like there's this chasm and you got to jump off the chasm. reckless abandonment to obedient, like that obedience concept is not always jumping over the cliff. Sometimes it's just walking around the corner, right?
Sometimes it's just the next small step, right?
Yeah. So I would argue in a lot of my faith journey, you know, even where we are with Hope and Center City and this thing coming together, which I'm super excited about and God's in the middle of, it started with saying yes to a cup of coffee with Mike and Pastor Mike kind of laying his heart out and me saying yes to another cup of coffee and another conversation. And then it was come speak to the elders. And then that was another conversation. And then, so I think sometimes we get a little bit caught up in the, okay, what mountain am I to take or what valley am I to jump over? And that's just, this is just a door. Like there's just two steps. And you'll find that, at least again, the testimony in my life has been is God shows up and it just gets easier to say yes. Like
Wow.
the ask becomes more and more obvious because he's been like, this is the journey we're on.
Yeah, that's really good. What about you? Can you think of a time in your life?
Oh yeah. I mean, mine does kind of fit the cliche though of like the actual move though. But
that's how God works sometimes.
it's true. Well, ironically, I think two of those were almost like kind of big moves for me, but it's because my personality is one that like change is not something that necessarily comes easy, and I'm trying to grow in that, right, and be more open and flexible.
Right now.
Trying, right? learn to try and embrace it. But you know, there were two big changes in my life that required me to literally move from a city and a place that I had been in for a long period of time. I think the one that's most recent is when Mariah and I moved to Charlotte. The Lord had made it pretty clear to us that our season was over at the last place we were with our church. But coming to Charlotte, we're like, okay, but is this supposed to make sense? Like, there's not a job lined up. There's not provision for this. And now I'm bringing my newly married wife. We hadn't been married a year yet, and going, okay, we're coming here. We don't know what it's going to look like. But, you know, are we going to come and go back into the secular world and take jobs working at doing whatever's necessary to pay the bills, you know?
Getting that Chick-fil-A money.
Literally, right? I always use the Mike Santiago joke of like, you know, I'll go work at Panera Bread. Like, you know, do whatever you got to do in the meantime. But like I think like Pastor Jon was saying, like every time we take one step of obedience, it became easier and easier. And we're like, man, okay, no, we feel like the Lord's in this. There's more clarity. There's more direction. And not only that, but I think both the steps of obedience become easier, but also you begin to see the common themes, the common thread, right? It's like we talk about when we do sermon prep, right? Yeah. Is we immediately, or not, well, I shouldn't say immediately, but through the process, we see the common thread going, okay, no, this is what the Lord's leading towards, you know? I think for me, even the people around me, a lot of times I'll notice that there'll be a general consensus that like the wise counsel around me is going, hey, no, this is probably what the Lord's doing through this, you know. And again, 90% of the time they don't have a "thus saith the Lord" moment, but they're like, I'm seeing a lot of, you know, a lot of continuity in this thought process.
Yeah, that is really good.
You know.
Yeah. Do you have anything that pops into your head?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like I'm walking through some of that right now.
I would agree.
Transitioning out of really, and not fully out of. So that's the other thing. It's like, you know, still have a little bit of a foot in education and school, but just not really knowing what it's going to look like. I have a clearer picture now that I'm getting closer to the school year starting. But knowing that John and I have been talking for a long time about what it would look like for us to be able to work in ministry together in a more day-to-day way. And then what that looks like for school and, you know, the domino of what that looks like for our boys and what that looks like in other areas of our life. So, yeah, but it is. It's definitely just being obedient, just willing to say, all right, Lord, what are you saying? And let me just do that thing.
Yeah.
So take the next small step.
Yeah.
And your story, having been around it, like, I love this example that you brought up because this is something that you knew at some point the Lord put on your heart years ago. Like, I remember you guys saying, we've talked, there's even a time that we were at a retreat and someone had a prophetic word about you. You weren't even on the retreat at the time as a staff person. And yet sometimes that go word is not necessarily go right now. It's I am preparing this, but you've been really faithful to wait for this season. How would you encourage someone who feels like they're in this place where they're hearing that word, but it's not necessarily the time to jump? Because sometimes we talk about like, yeah, go right away. And that's true. If God says go and makes the way, but sometimes what he's telling us is wait, I'm preparing you and preparing the place. How would you encourage someone in that spot?
Right. So honestly, I just needed to continue to pray about it. I needed to continue to talk about it. I needed to continue to hear, just to make sure that I was listening to the Lord. I think one of the huge things that I've just continued to see and learn from the Lord is that he does have a timing to things, and that I don't want to run too far ahead and I don't want to be too far behind. I want to try to stay in step with him and work in his timing. Not that I'm going to mess things up cosmically, but at the same time, like you said, there is a period of preparation and feeling that like the Lord is saying, okay now, okay now. And so we've had several conversations. I've had several conversations with my head of school, and just knowing like this is somewhere on the horizon. I'm going to keep being faithful to working in that direction, but I'm not going to jump the gun. I'm going to wait for the Lord to say now.
Yeah.
So it's a go and a now.
Well, and even to that point, what about the times like when we have to stay the course and where we currently are, though, right? Because sometimes, to both of your points, like it can be very easy to go, okay, well, this is a dream that the Lord's given me, so like, let's make this thing happen. Yeah. But what about just the importance of being, like you're saying, being faithful in where we currently are? I think that's something Pastor Mike emphasized for us, even in our transition before we came to Hope, was finishing well where we were. Because if it could have been so easy to go, no, my brain's already on where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, one of the last conversations I had in regards to the timing with my head of school was, I don't ever want to do anything half-heartedly. And I know that moving in this direction, and mind you, again, timing of the Lord, all of this conversation happened before one little word about hope came up.
That's crazy.
So what I told him was, I cannot do just a just job, a good, fair job. I can't be here part-time and here part-time. That's not fair to you. That's not fair to the families, the students, the employees. And so I know now, engaging more, I can't do this part-time.
Yeah. And I'll just quickly, a little plug to godly leadership. Her headmaster, who's a good friend of mine, embraced the idea that the change was going to be tough for them, but God was in it.
Yeah.
And so there was seasons where he was saying, all right. And it's funny because before, like we had talked again, we've been talking for over 2 years now, close to 2 years, about transition in one
Maybe
form
more
or
than
another.
that.
Yeah. In one form or another, or what it would look like. And the plan was always 2024 was the transition. So we'd been talking to Frank for, over a school year. So again, even then he wasn't like, we weren't thinking any of this, but the day that I picked up the phone and called Frank as a mentor, as a friend, as a wise counsel, I'm like, hey man, this is going on. What do you think? What are you hearing God saying? And, Frank being involved in some of the board structure of this all was really clear with me and yet really encouraging. And then one of the first things out of his mouth was, this is God's timing. You're going to need Jess.
Wow.
So
wow.
It's like for me, I've always said, if you're pursuing full-time occupational ministry, if not, just this doesn't, you can fast forward 30 seconds or so. But one of the things people become obsessed with, I'm called to a city or I'm called to a brand of a church. Like I just feel like God's calling me to this brand of a church or calling me to the city. I would argue as an associate pastor, you want to make sure that the person that you are following honors the Lord and can hear from God and is not so self-seeking that all they hear is God's voice as it pertains to them and not to you. because it made a huge difference in this transition. I would argue in the transition that several of the transitions that I've been in, it's so much of the leap is because you're looking at a leader's face and he's like, nope, that's what God's saying. Even if it costs me something, I'm okay with what God is saying for you and what's next.
And even to that point, like if I may piggyback on that,
Yeah.
like, cause I feel like the Lord's been challenging me just in the past couple of days coming back off this vacation, to going like, to teaching me and reminding me to take my eyes off myself. And so to your point, like even how does that look for stewarding stewarding volunteers underneath me well, right? Is going like, man, even when it costs me, am I willing to do whatever it takes to put those volunteers in the best place for their health, for their well-being, for them to use God's gifting and be in the timing of where the Lord's leading them. But if I'm so focused on what I feel like the vision is the Lord's given me for my ministry or whatever it is, then how am I really stewarding them well? Or am I using it to be self-serving?
Absolutely.
So that's the same call for us in whatever area we're leading in.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, all of these stories were better than the one that I prepared, but
Oh, come on. We want to hear it though.
I mean, yeah. I'm going to share it. Don't you worry. I don't share this story often, but for me, it was going back to school. If you've been at Center City, you know I just finished my MDiv in May. It was 4 years of being a full-time student and a full-time pastor. And it was just one of those things that I just felt that nudge from the Holy Spirit. And then there was some wise counsel from leaders in my life, and in particularly Pastor David Dukeson, who was my pastor when we first started this conversation, because it took a couple years from when the conversation started to when I actually pulled the trigger and did it. But yeah, it was something I was afraid of. But it's like the Lord kept putting people in my life, and then the pandemic came that was like, well, now your time's not quite as taken up as it would have otherwise been. And even the last step of my hesitation was finances. I just thought, it seems like bad stewardship to take out all of these loans to do this thing. And I remember David just looking at me and being, if finances are the only reason you're saying no, then you need to trust God and turn around. And I got a little scholarship help throughout the whole thing, but then upon graduating, received a gift that's actually going to cover all of the debt that I incurred, that I didn't know was coming until the weekend of graduation. Was just like, and God doesn't always work that way. And I would have been fine, like had a plan, was ready to be paying that off. But it was just such a good reminder of every step of the way. I mean, you saw, I actually think I became a better pastor while I was a student, and I was worried, like, I won't be able to do this job as well if I'm divided. But instead, the schoolwork was kind of pouring into what I was doing here. So maybe there's someone out there that you've got that same nudge, and you're like, I don't know how I can make the time work and the finances work. If it's really God, take each step. And it was the same thing. I'll talk to the admissions counselor.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll answer when he calls me back. He had to call me quite a few times.
Dodging his phone
Okay, I'm
calls.
going to fill out this form and just say yes to each step. And now I'm done, which is still kind of crazy. And I'll probably go back again at some point. But I'll wait at least a year. The other point that Kevin made is that your obedience is a blessing for others. So he talked about how Abraham followed in obedience. Eventually, God showed him where to go. It wasn't all like unicorns and roses. There were people there. But that when God led him, he said, I will make you a blessing for all the nations. Like, I will bless you, but you will be a blessing to others. And so this is just story hour. I don't know if you knew that when you're joining us. But the question I have now is, when in your life have you received a blessing from someone else's obedience?
Wow.
I mean, there are probably several that I haven't even realized.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there are probably several times where just regular, everyday, ordinary obedience has blessed me in ways that I haven't realized. Through prayers, through encouragements, through text messages, through letters. I mean, I'm a sentimental person.
Me too.
But I'm not an on the phone all the time person. So being on the receiving end of a card or a text message or something like that. I remember there was a lady in our old church where we grew up in high school and young adult ministry. Her ministry was to write birthday cards to everybody. It was not a small church.
That's amazing.
But the people she had developed a relationship with, the ministry team, the wives, the kids, she would send them a card. And so knowing that she was going to send that card, it was just always such an encouragement to be like, oh, somebody thought of me on my birthday. Wow. That's so sweet.
Yeah.
What a silly, it's not that it's silly, but what a simple thing to do. God's telling you, write a birthday card to everybody. Okay, fine. And it doesn't seem like anything, but it was so sweet.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll keep thinking while
Yeah, that's a
else.
great example.
Oh, I've got a.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Let's see. Had it happen at least once. No.
I feel like it's a snowball. You start to think and you're like, and then there was that.
But
And
this
then there was
happened
that.
2 different times. One time in particular, though, that I had a guy in my life that I don't even know that I would say I was necessarily tremendously close with, but we had gone to church together, and he was actually the father of a friend of mine. And at one point, he was in a place where he was upgrading, buying a new vehicle, and he blessed me with a car.
Wow.
Like, no expectation, no...
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, nothing inhibiting, nothing required of me. But for him to be like, look, I'm in a place where the Lord's growing my business and this is happening. And he's like, hey, I know this is something that would help you. And it literally, to your point, it freed up. I had a car loan that I probably should have had at the time. And so I was not only that, but then I was able to literally be in a place where I was then free of debt. And that was a big thing for me because he was just willing to be generous and also to be obedient,
Yeah. Well, that's a great example. And you said that's happened twice?
Yeah, that one was the most significant of those two.
Look
but
at
yeah,
God.
yeah, right. It's incredible.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that is incredible. I thought of my parents first, and particularly what would probably embarrass him, but I'm going to do it anyway. Hi, Dad. When we were young, the church we went to was a pass the plate church for the offering, and my dad was a lawyer. He did well, and he tithed to the local church every single month. And he would actually rotate through, letting us be the one who put the check in the plate,
Teaching
as
you how to give.
really little kids. And I know he probably wrestled because you hear don't let your left hand know what your right is doing. But he would let us look at the amount on the check and talk to us about how 10% is going here. That's a non-negotiable. This is what God asks. This is what we do. And I think his obedience meant that that's never been something that I've wrestled with. As I say this,
That's so
I'm
good.
late paying my tithe because I've been busy. But
Ashley
but just a
Kramer.
week late. It's fine. It's coming.
Smote.
But I just think that was such an example of him as a parent showing his children that I'm not just asking you to obey me because I'm your dad. I'm also obeying God. And it was in lots of areas. Both of my parents were so good at this, but that's just one that sticks with me that as an adult, I have never questioned whether or not I'm going to tithe, even if I have no margin in my budget. And it's really because of my parents' faithful obedience.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that passage about not letting your left hand know what your right hand doing is one of the most overused, just absolutely misquoted passages of all of Scripture. But another story for another
we've
day.
had that conversation before. But
Yeah. No, I mean,
Yeah.
People
I
used
would.
to dodge accountability and
Yeah.
other things, right?
I'd be close to being like, yeah, just send that check down the aisle. Let everybody see. I would never suggest
yeah,
that.
and it wasn't for the pride of
No,
look
no,
at me.
it's
It
not.
was for I want you to see
Teaching,
that I'm
yeah.
being
Teaching
obedient.
moment,
Yeah.
right.
No, absolutely. He in the
And then we had to do that with our allowance.
Yeah, in the business
diamond.
world, we would call that setting culture. He's setting culture. He's letting everybody know in this house this is what we do, and I think that's so much that's necessary. I am a product of other people's blessings across the board. In my personal life, again with the boys, that season was a financial. It seemed like a monster. Like the amount of money that's necessary to adopt 2 kids is just crazy, and to have so many people kind of pour into that. That when it was all said and done. There was some investment on our end, but for the most part, we walked away with all of that need being met, which is incredible. My ministry life has been a product of incredible men and women of faith building in, these amazing platforms and then creating space for a 20-year-old. I still remember the conversation with our lead pastor, Max Sheary. Shout out Max Sheary. I'm just shouting out all the lead pastors today.
It's story time and shout out
That's
time.
right. When I was the associate youth ministry coordinator, and the lead youth pastor left to pursue a church. So there was an opening. They brought in somebody else. I did about 18 months to 24 months with that somebody else. And both guys were great mentors of mine, just kind of showcased how to do ministry in different styles. But at this point, I became the junior high pastor, but I'm 20, maybe 21 at this point. Still young. My degree was in graphic design. I didn't have a Bible degree, although I took so many Berean classes that at that point it was crazy, and I kept taking them. I don't know if I had to take another Romans
Probably
class
still
in
haven't
Berean. Yeah,
finished the Berean courses.
no, I did end up going back to school and getting my master's, but not through Berean. But there was I had no business on any of those platforms. So when the last youth pastor had left, I walked into a meeting with the lead pastor at the time, and what basically submitted my resignation was like, hey, listen, I'll help you through the transition, but I can't do this again. Feel like my heart's being ripped out of my chest. I did this with the guy that mentored me, and now I did this with this guy I fell in love with, and he was such a blessing to the ministry and taught me so much. And now I don't know if I can do it a third time, but I also know that I shouldn't even be in this room, period. So I'm going to give you all that I can and then figure out what's next, whether I pursue a middle school position somewhere or maybe even step back into the secular world. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And before I could finish that thought, the lead pastor, Max, looked over and said, hey, before you fire yourself, we're not looking for anybody else. It's you. And there was no reason for it. You know, people would say, well, John, you were the obvious choice. How obvious? I had no education. The only experience I had was in that room. And so here's this youth ministry of 150 kids in the middle of Fort Lauderdale, and you're going to put a 21-year-old in that spot?
Wow.
Which also included...
Yeah, that sounds insane to me even today.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. So... And even beyond that, my development, like I was preaching in an auditorium that sat close to 4,000 people without a Bible degree. Now, again, and there's some that right now, because of the way that the world is, well, John, you were not prepared. Let me make sure that there's some clarity here. There was a lot of preparation done. There was a lot of hand-holding, walking through my theology. I was vetted. Yeah. So this wasn't, there's a 21-year-old that looks like he'd be cool. Let's bring him up. There was none of that. I was prepared for that spot, but I still had no business in that spot. So much of my ministry life was a product of, Rick Ross built a $6 million facility in Concord and was like, hey, I need a youth pastor to run this. Like that's the blessing of God and me being blessed by somebody else's faithfulness. And, you know, yeah, that's when I look back at that season to that question, I can go on and on. There's like 50 of those stories.
I know. It is fun because you do start thinking and you're like, oh yeah. Like kind of to your point earlier, I think of how many leaders have had that mentality that you had that's like, I'm going to be obedient to where God's put me to develop the people under me and not just have them work. I mean, not to be uncomfortable, but you're definitely one of them over the last 5 years. That's someone's obedience that has been a blessing to me.
Yeah.
And one that I want to pass on. It's kind of fun because once you realize how much you've received, it also makes it exciting to be like, I want to be obedient in the way that also blesses other people.
Absolutely.
I think that's where Kevin's message really hit its stride, is this idea of like, when I'm a blessing to you, when that's my goal. You know, it's kind of like in marriage, we talk about that submission concept, like, when my objective is that Jess wins and her objective is that I win, we both win.
Yeah.
So within the context of the church community, when it's my objective to make sure that Ashley is fully living the life that God's called her to, and David is fully living the life that God is calling him to within the scope of their occupation, within the scope of their callings and giftings. Yeah. We say it all the time. The phrase we use is, I'm more...
who you are.
I'm more concerned about who you are than what you do.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if ministry is absent of people in the heart of people, you're not doing ministry, you're running a business. And that's not what we're doing. Yeah. So I love that picture of that cycle. And that's the beauty of a church community. And I'm not even talking Sunday morning. I'm just talking about being a part of a faith community.
Yeah.
We share in that blessing, which, by the way, we will get to in this conversation of Corinthians, because Paul is pretty adamant. Like, there's a season where the church started becoming about very selfish in nature, and we see that separation specifically around the process of communion. I cannot wait till that message. That's not this week, but I can't wait till that message. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah. So one of the things that we, kind of to your point, challenged this congregation with this week was to spend time listening to what God may be saying. What is the go that you are hearing? And I think that's something that we can talk about, but there may be some people who hear that and they're like, how do I listen for the word of God? So I was wondering, just to get super practical, specifically with this challenge this week in prayer, how do you listen to hear what God is saying?
I don't mean to jump all over this conversation. I think there's several things. I think we instantly go to make sure you're praying, make sure you're reading. If you don't know how to do that, just go back and listen to any of the other podcasts, because we always spend time on prayer and read. But specifically when it comes to the go, I also think listen to what makes your heart come alive. Like, pay attention to what makes your heart come alive, because often the go is there. Pay attention to what infuriates you, because sometimes the go is there.
Oh, so improving drivers in Charlotte?
You're going to be teaching drivers ed
Every day. Every day.
Sorry, it's raining today, and it was a little rough getting here.
She's going to have a ministry of driving school. It's called all I want to color.com. Just driving school from Ashley.
Sorry to interrupt.
No worries.
What makes you come alive? What infuriates you?
What's infuriating?
Not from a pet peeve standpoint.
Not from a pet peeve standpoint.
But a holy, righteous anger.
There's a righteous anger that we lose sight of. And I love, the Hope Street Food Pantry is just on my mind right now, obviously, because of the nature of this deal, on top of the other things that we navigate. But to hear Mel and even Mike talk about Hope Street Food Pantry from this place of, it just infuriates us to some degree that there's people in our county that are going without food. That's crazy. That's crazy. And it could be that in that righteous indignation, the idea that 13-year-old girls are being targeted and 12-year-old girls are being targeted for trafficking. The idea that there are people who are living just lavish lives of luxury but have no connection to the living God.
Right.
That can infuriate you. It can infuriate you that the brokenness in the families on your cul-de-sac. Like, I talk to my neighbor and there's turmoil in their marriage. I talk to my other neighbor and there's, a lack of faithfulness in that marriage. One of the guys that I lean on so much, Jabbar, for him, it's a lack of financial stewardship in underserved communities. That's a part. Now, again, I say infuriate, and that seems like a negative context, but I do think that sometimes God speaks to those things that you get angered by, and that's a holy indignation.
Yeah.
And
Stir us up to action, right?
That might be a go. And then the third thing, what are the things that you feel most alive? What are the things that infuriate you? And then what are you talking about? Because you'll often find, again, if all of this is filtered through a healthy heart that's been sacrificed unto the Lord, right?
Yeah.
But if you find yourself talking about things, in particular an issue or a group of people, there's a chance that there may be some call there.
The only thing that I would add to that, I love all of that. Knowing my personality, I can get confused by what I notice and see all of these things and almost become paralyzed with how many things there are out there. And usually what that means is I need quiet. And so it may be as simple as don't play a podcast or the radio in your car while you're driving this week, and instead just say, hey, God, I want you to help me notice what it is that you are pointing out to me. And just taking that time to not see every ad that comes on. And I know it's the Olympics, which I love. I don't know if everyone else is a geek like that, but turning the TV off, spending some time in quiet. Usually that's when I get that kind of paralysis of, oh my gosh, there's so much to do and so much need. What do I do? It's because I'm looking around more than I'm looking up, and I have to just quiet things down to hear.
Isn't it that leading into our well, I'd say our weakness, but like what each of us realize that allows us to be more aware of the presence of God, right?
Yeah,
Because like whether it's quietness or sometimes it's for people, they can become so caught up in their own thoughts. They need the counselor. They need somebody to help walk them through what they're processing internally to go, hey, is this logical? Does this make sense? But there's value in both. They're absolutely necessary. Because I know recently I've been needing more of what you've been describing of that quietness.
It's crazy because in the middle of that message, what I thought was giftings. Like, so knowing your giftings is critical.
Yeah.
And then I think to that point of do what's right in front of you, what's arm length? Like what's, and not saying that that's the goal right now, or the goal long term, but you'd be amazed at how much it's like, oh God, I just need you to download this incredible picture of what it's going to be. And he's like, oh, I just need you to take a left. And it's right within arm's distance. And it might not seem like much, but it's like beginning to unlock that thread that's going to just, or pull on that thread that's going to lead to so much more. But it's that thing that's within arm's length.
And how much of that obedience sometimes is even, like to your point, brings clarity to a point that like maybe something that you don't even think is even related. So like you take a step of obedience and then out of it, there's some interaction or some aspect of it that comes alive that you didn't even know was there.
Yeah.
Like that you didn't even see on the horizon.
Absolutely.
You know, that then all of a sudden aligns where you're.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, kind of where I am personally in my situation because we had been talking about transitioning for a while. We had prepared those conversations, had those talks, and hope wasn't on the horizon. And then
that
it's
sounds so bad if you don't know hope is a name. Hope wasn't on the horizon.
The concept of hope is always on the horizon.
Hope Church. Hope Church. But then, again, that it's time, and it's like this whole thing. Oh, sorry, knocked my mic over. This whole thing opened up right after that, and so it's like I know that we think things are going to be, but even in those things that seem quick, because this whole transition happened very quickly, there's so much. There are so many layers of preparation and so many acts of obedience that happen before that unravels. So it's almost like, all right, we all flower bloomed, yay! And it seems instantaneous, but it is everybody's little steps of obedience that got us to where we are.
What I love about the faith journey is when you start realizing how interwove everything is.
That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
That part of why you don't have to address everything is God is God, and He's got a whole church of people.
Yeah. I mean, even within the context of this couch, me and David have known each other second and third tier kind of from a distance for, over
probably 10 years.
10 years now. David and Dugason and I go back even further than that from Florida. Wow. Me and Mike Fields first touched base when I initially came to North Carolina once or twice at the district level.
Wow.
And then, even the way that Ashley came to the Lord was through an intern that was working to Center City, not to the Lord, sorry, was through an intern who was working for me and David at the time.
Wow.
And invited Ashley to Center City. I think often we get obsessed with this idea of what God is calling me to instead of what God is calling us to collectively, because in that I don't have I get asked the question all the time, John, how are you going to do this? And my response almost instantaneous is, I'm not doing this. We're doing this.
Wow.
God's brought David into this house for this season. He's brought Ashley into this house for this season. So many people, he's brought Jess in transitioning her journey into this season. Michaela, Dom, across the board, Heather, we can go down the list. We'll be here all day, but that's just the staff. That's not to mention the people, the Ernie Johns of the world, so many of the elders and so many of the stewards. And then that's not even mentioning the congregation. Right. So Yes, absolutely. Can one person make a difference in a city? I don't know. But what I do believe is a collection of people inspired by God all saying yes and going when he says go. It's a brilliant picture. And I'm enamored with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so funny. That's where I was going. So you just answered my next question.
Well, there you go.
Which is awesome. But that he showed that video of the rocket, which I really want to go back and like watch on a screen that's not one of our screens, even though they're awesome. Because I feel like I didn't get the contrast quite as much, but this idea that it was 1 a.m. and when this rocket shot up, it was bright enough to light up the darkness like it was the day. And that was such a great picture of what it looks like when all of us are being obedient, that it's not even just how we relate to one another, but it changes the environment around us. And so you kind of just mentioned it, but I also just want to give you a chance to dream a little bit as lead pastor of this thing that God is building. What do you see for Charlotte if all of us collectively answer this call to go in this season?
You know, there's some dreams that I have specifically for this community. I'm going to put that aside for a moment. I think our city is primed for revival.
Mm-hmm.
Hear me. I'm Pentecostal through and through. So you cut me and I bleed Pentecostal theology. Like that's my heartbeat. I don't know how people, embrace the faith without the power of the Holy Spirit. I'm huge there. But for me, revival is not, more people speaking in tongues or more people, that's all fine. Revival to me is dead things coming alive.
Mm-hmm.
And when I walk around our city, I see a lot of dead things. And there's just this encouragement recently because churches are starting to drop their names and saying, no. Like, we just need to come together and showcase the beautiful nature of the God that we serve and watch dead things come to life.
Yeah.
So whether it's what God is doing through Tyson and Vision, what God is doing through Wesley at the Berg, what God is doing through Doug Witherop and the leadership of Multiply, what God is doing outside of our denominational, deals, what God is doing through Central, what God is doing through First Baptist, what God is doing in the Presbyterian community, like. There is a refining, I feel like, of the body and a coming together to say, we're going to put some of these secondary things aside to showcase the glory of God. So ultimately, what my heart bleeds for is a church united saying our priority is the gospel, that people would come to the saving knowledge of Jesus, be disciples, and make disciples. And so, there's some dreams I have for what that role looks like for us, and I'm excited about that. We've talked about expressions and how to quickly and effectively and very culturally, with culturalization and contextualization, with some contextualization, reach parts of our city that seem to be more and more just right for the gospel. So I'm excited about that. We'll talk about that in due time. But if you're asking me like what's on my heart now for the city, that's what I see. That's what I see. And listen, if you're looking to plant a church, come to Charlotte. If you're looking, to start a church, to take a church, there's such a community right now is saying, no, we need to win our city and we need more people on board. So
show up for Charlotte Crusade.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
Yeah.
Like to that point, you mentioned on Sunday, Charlotte Crusade.
September 21st. It's a Saturday. Bojangles Coliseum, 7 p.m. Opportunity for people to hear the gospel presented. And you're going to have leaders, as Pastor Jon has mentioned, all across our city that love Jesus and are not there because it's about their church, other than they're simply there because we want to see people come to know Jesus and have opportunities to connect them to churches that will be represented there.
Yeah.
But again, the priority being that the name of Jesus is made well known.
And so I would say this is something we want you to come to, but more than that, we want you praying and inviting people who don't know Jesus. Like we're going to go and be encouraged. Like I believe God will show up. But the point of it is, who are those people?
The lost.
Yeah. Who are those people who need to be brought to life that you can invite, that will come and sit with you, that might not show up to a random church on a Sunday morning. And we're going to get more into that and spend some time in prayer over the next coming weeks and months, which is going to be really exciting. But what you were saying was just too in line with what's happening, not to mention it now.
Absolutely.
So where are we headed? We took a week off from 1 Corinthians, but we're diving back in. Are we out of chapter 1?
We are at 1, and we're actually going to jump over chapter 2.
3, right?
We're going right into 3.
Yeah. So we're jumping. Oh, yeah, got it.
Yeah, we're jumping over chapter 2 and going right into 3. So, Paul spends some time now addressing what the church should look like and how it's built. So that's an exciting picture as you consider, like, it's a young church. They're trying to figure out what the culture should be. What are we here doing? And Paul's like, okay, this is how the house is built. So by redefining that, I think it's critical 2,000 years later to remember what we're built on. I live in an old house. My house was built in 1895. And still, you can go into the basement and see that the original pillars are still holding.
Wow.
So, yes, my house is all kind of wavy, and it's got some funky corners, and there's not a straight floor or wall in it, but the foundation is still there. I had talked to an architect, an engineer. I'm giving all my illustrations now. I talked to an engineer when we first bought the house. And he was like, well, what are your concerns? I was like, well, the floors are all kind of creaky and stuff. Like, I'm afraid the foundation is not settled. And he chuckled, was like, oh, that's cute. It's 100 years old, John. This house is not moving. I was like, well, like, should I try to straighten? He's like, you can try to straighten the floors, but the truth is you're only going to do more damage. At the end of the day, the foundation is settled and it's strong. It's not moving. So there's times where the church needs to be reminded, this is our foundation.
Yeah.
This is what we look like.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the walls, so much of that is a product of the beauty of the church, but the foundation, this is what it looks like. This is who builds the walls. And, the disciples' teachings, all that stuff. I can't wait. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It is going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you make plans to join us on Sunday. We'll be on Freedom Drive at 9 and 11:30 and Johnston Ayler, did I say it right?
That's
Ayler
right.
Road at 10:15. We can't wait to see you then.